There are souls that arrive in this world carrying a weight they never agreed to hold, a weight older than their first breath, a weight that settles quietly in the bones long before life has a chance to explain itself. Some people feel this from childhood, that subtle pressure behind the ribs, like a memory they never lived yet somehow recognize. They grow up sensing they were born already tired, already burdened, already different, and they learn early that their heart absorbs the world more intensely than others seem capable of. While most children run freely through the days, these souls move with a strange awareness, as if they are walking through a landscape slightly heavier than everyone else, noticing shadows where others see only light, hearing quiet truths beneath the noise of ordinary life. And because no one speaks about this burden, they learn to hide it, to behave as if nothing is happening inside them, as if their silence is not filled with questions that never find a place to land. There are people who discover very young that their suffering is not only an event, but a presence. It follows them even when everything around appears calm, and they do not understand why. They carry a sensitivity that turns ordinary disappointments into deep wounds, and simple words into sharp echoes that stay inside for years. They do not know how to explain it without sounding fragile, so they keep it to themselves and pretend to be strong while collapsing quietly under the surface. Some of them remember moments when a teacher raised their voice or a parent looked at them with a cold expression, and something inside cracked in a way that never truly healed. Not because the moment itself was catastrophic, but because their heart was built like a thin sheet of glass that absorbs every vibration of the world. They learn to live like that, holding their breath emotionally, so no one notices the tremor, and this silence becomes their secret companion. As they grow older, the world demands resilience, but no one teaches them how to carry the weight they came with. They begin adulthood believing they are simply too emotional or too dramatic or too weak, while in truth, they are simply too aware. Their soul perceives life with a sharpness that cuts, and even joy arrives accompanied by fear of losing it. They sit at dinner tables smiling politely, while their mind is full of unspoken storms. They go to work pretending everything is normal, yet every failure feels like a prophecy, and every success feels temporary. And because no one names this experience, they assume they are alone. They watch others navigate life with an ease they cannot imitate, and they quietly wonder why their heart feels centuries older than their face. Some souls experience something even more peculiar. Every time they love as if they must save the world. They love with an intensity that overwhelms others but feels natural to them. They give too much, feel too deeply, worry too often, stay awake too long, and when they lose someone, even in small ways, the grief enters them like a slow flood that never fully recedes. They do not understand why letting go hurts so much, why memories cling to the skin, why voices echo in their mind long after the person has disappeared. They think this is a flaw, but it is simply the way their soul was shaped, a vessel made to hold not just their own pain, but the pain of everyone they encounter. There are those who look back on their childhood and realize they were the emotional caretakers of the family. They were the ones who stayed quiet so others could be loud, the ones who comforted parents who should have been comforting them, the ones who learned to read the room like a survival skill. They became responsible too early, thoughtful too early, old too early. And this early aging of the soul creates a lifelong sensation of being misplaced. They arrive in adulthood feeling as if they have already lived several lives, carrying exhaustion that others cannot see. This is the kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from witnessing life with unfiltered awareness. Some souls also carry inherited pain, a grief passed down from ancestors who could not speak their suffering. Scientists now discuss epigenetic trauma, but these souls always knew something was off, long before anyone studied it. They felt the sadness of generations without understanding why. They carried fears that did not belong to them. They sensed losses they never lived. And because no one talks about this invisible heritage, they believe the sadness is their fault. They walk through life with a quiet heaviness that feels ancient, as if their very blood remembers sorrows the mind has never heard. And there is another layer, one even deeper. These souls do not simply feel pain. They absorb the pain of the world. They walk into a room and sense the atmosphere instantly. They notice the tension in someone's voice before anyone else. They feel the loneliness of strangers as if it were their own. They are the ones who cannot ignore the crying child at the supermarket, the lost elderly person staring into space, the friend pretending to be fine while their eyes tremble. They are the ones who cry during documentaries, who feel restless at night because something in the world feels out of place. They carry this as if it were their personal responsibility, and they think something is wrong with them for feeling so much. But nothing is wrong. Their soul is simply tuned differently. They came into this world with an antenna that picks up frequencies others do not hear. And this can be a beautiful gift, but it is also a quiet torment. It makes them compassionate beyond measure, yet vulnerable in ways the world rarely protects. It makes them wise yet weary, loving yet wounded, strong yet silently breaking. This is why they often feel misunderstood. Others see only the surface, but inside them there is an entire universe trembling with intensity. If you recognize yourself in these words, take a moment to breathe. You are not strange. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are simply one of those rare souls who arrived in life carrying a deeper sensitivity than the world knows how to hold. And acknowledging this is the first step toward understanding the quiet truth that shapes your existence. If this touched you, share your thoughts in the comments and consider subscribing so that your presence continues to walk with us in these reflections. There comes a moment in life when the silence inside the house begins to reveal things you never noticed before. A moment when the walls seem to breathe differently and every corner of the room feels a little colder than you remember. It happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way dusk turns into night, long before we realize the light has changed. At first it is just a quiet afternoon, then a quiet evening, then a quiet week. And before you understand what has unfolded around you, the silence becomes a kind of companion that follows you from room to room, not hostile, but strangely heavy, as if it were aware of your presence in a way no one else seems to be anymore. You notice it most when you close the door behind you and the air becomes still, as if the house were holding its breath together with you. It often begins with small details. A cup left untouched on the table for hours because no one else will pick it up. The sound of your own footsteps becoming the only noise in the hallway. The chair on the other side of the dining table remaining empty, night after night. You start to realize how many of your habits were built around the presence of people who no longer share your space. You open the window and hear the world outside, but the world inside remains distant, as if your home has entered a quiet winter of its own. And you begin to feel a strange sensation, not exactly sadness, but something close to dissolving, as if parts of you were fading into the routine without asking permission. There are mornings when you look in the mirror, and for a fraction of a second, you do not recognize your own reflection, not because it has changed too much, but because you are seeing it through a different light, one that carries years of accumulated silence. You notice the faint lines around the eyes, the soft tiredness resting on the face, the way the shoulders have learned to fall slightly inward as if trying to make your presence occupy less space. You remember a version of yourself you have not seen in a long time, a version that laughed louder and moved faster and believed the world was paying attention. And you wonder when exactly the shift happened, when your reflection became someone you observe instead of someone you are. Many people over 50 describe this sensation without finding words for it. It is not depression, not loss, not loneliness in the usual sense. It is something more subtle, an erosion of presence. You start to feel as if you are disappearing from the edges inward, not dying, but dimming, slowly blending into the quiet of your own life. Conversations become shorter, phone calls become rarer, and sometimes the only voice you hear for hours is the one inside your head. You keep performing your responsibilities, preparing meals, folding clothes, writing lists, but there is a sense that you are living on the surface of your days rather than inside them. There are evenings when the silence becomes so thick that even the smallest sound feels like a disruption. You drop a spoon and the noise startles you. You cough and it echoes through the hallway in a way that feels embarrassing. You turn on the television just to fill the emptiness, not to watch anything, but to remind yourself that life still has sound. You wander from one room to another without knowing what you are looking for. The house seems to grow larger as your world grows smaller, and you start to wonder if you are becoming invisible even to yourself. Some people feel this most acutely after children move out or a partner stops sharing the same routines. The rooms that once held laughter, arguments, footsteps, and warmth now carry a kind of stillness that feels too large to live in. You remember the chaos you used to complain about and realize it was never chaos at all. It was life. And now, with all that space emptied, you become aware of how much energy you once invested in tending to others. When those responsibilities fade, what remains is a version of you that has forgotten how to exist without being needed. Others experience this disappearance while living with someone who no longer sees them. Two people can share the same house, yet inhabit different universes, passing each other like ghosts in hallways that once held tenderness. You can feel invisible even in the presence of another body, and sometimes that invisibility hurts more deeply than solitude itself. You learn to keep your thoughts quiet, to swallow your feelings, to move carefully as if trying not to disturb a balance that no longer includes you. The silence becomes a mask, and you wear it because the alternative feels too vulnerable. And then, there are moments, rare but striking, when the world outside suddenly reflects your inner quiet. You walk into a store and the clerk barely looks at you. You speak in a conversation and your words fall flat, unnoticed. You stand in a crowd and realize no one truly sees you. It is not that people are cruel. They are simply busy, distracted, absorbed in their own noise. But for a soul already living inside a soft fade, these small social oversights feel like confirmations. You begin to suspect that you are disappearing not only in your home, but also in the world. Yet inside this fading, something stirs. A quiet awareness grows, a sense of noticing your own disappearance from the inside. This awareness might frighten you at first because it brings attention back to what you tried to ignore, but it also holds the possibility of waking something that has been asleep for a long time. The silence that once felt heavy begins to take the shape of a question you may not fully understand yet, but one that draws you inward with unusual clarity. And as you sit with this question, real or imagined, you may feel a subtle shift within yourself, a kind of internal recognition that whispers you are still here, even if life has grown quiet around you. If this reflection resonates with you, I invite you to share your story in the comments and subscribe so that our journey can continue to unfold together in a space where your presence is truly seen. Simone Weil believed that suffering was not simply an interruption in life, but a doorway, a threshold into a form of awareness that most people spend their entire existence avoiding. She saw pain not as punishment, but as a kind of stripping away, a slow removal of illusions until only the essential remains. To her, suffering was the moment when the soul is forced to confront reality without the comforting layers we build around ourselves. And although this idea may seem harsh, anyone who has lived long enough knows that some of the clearest insights in life arise only when something has broken inside us. It is in those moments, when a crack appears, that light begins to enter from angles we never expected. Will herself lived a life marked by an almost unnatural sensitivity. As a child, she would stop eating when she learned someone else in the world did not have food. As a young woman, she would work in factories even though she came from an intellectual family, simply because she needed to understand suffering through lived experience rather than theory. She once wrote that attention is the purest form of generosity, and she believed that suffering sharpens our attention to the world in ways comfort never could. When life is easy, we do not look closely. When life hurts, we begin to see truth hidden beneath the surface of things. There are people who discover this too early, long before they have the emotional tools to understand it. Think of the child who learns to interpret the moods of adults, not because they want to, but because their safety depends on it. That child grows up with a finely tuned awareness of emotional nuance. They are experts at detecting tension, disappointment, or danger. Without knowing it, they are doing what Weil believed suffering forces us to do. They are reading the world without illusions. They are seeing what others ignore. And although this skill is painful to develop, it becomes a quiet form of wisdom that follows them into adulthood. Suffering, in Weil's view, creates a kind of spiritual gravity. It pulls us downward, deeper, closer to the most honest parts of ourselves. When life strips away the distractions we cling to, we are confronted with the raw material of who we are. Many people resist this descent because it feels like falling. But Weil believed that falling is sometimes the only way to reach the ground of truth. It is like the moment when a storm knocks out all the lights in a house. At first, there is panic, then discomfort, and then finally a strange clarity. You begin to navigate by touch, by instinct, by a deeper sense of presence. You become aware of the quiet pulse of things you never noticed before. There is a story often told about Simone Weil during her time working in a factory. She suffered terribly from the physical strain. She fainted from exhaustion, injured herself repeatedly, and lived among workers who saw her as fragile. Yet she insisted on staying. She believed that unless she entered the world of suffering herself, she would never understand the deeper truths of human existence. This may sound extreme, but for Weil, suffering was not something to flee from. It was a form of knowledge, a language spoken only in moments of vulnerability, and she wanted to be fluent in it. Many people later in life realize they have been practicing this form of awareness without naming it. They have endured losses, betrayals, disappointments, illnesses, or long years of being unseen. And through all of that, something inside them has become sharper. Not harder, but sharper. They notice details that others overlook. They sense dishonesty even when words sound polite. They feel the emotional temperature of a room the moment they enter. They carry a quiet depth that comes only from having lived through seasons that demanded more of them than they thought they had to give. Will also believed that suffering reveals the limits of our control. Most of us spend years believing we can shape life to our expectations, but when pain arrives, truly arrives, it exposes the truth that some things cannot be altered by force or intention. In that surrender, Weil saw a form of purification, not a holy purification, but a human one. The kind that comes when you finally stop fighting the current and allow yourself to float, not because you want to, but because you cannot do anything else. And in that stillness, you begin to see what matters in a gentler light. There is something almost paradoxical in her thought. She believed that suffering can both break a person and open them. It can crush the ego while freeing the soul. It can burn and illuminate in the same breath. And although this duality is difficult to accept, many who have walked through deep pain understand its truth intuitively. They emerge differently, not necessarily stronger, but more aware, more present, more capable of seeing life without the blindfold of expectation. If you reflect on your own life, you may notice moments when suffering forced you to pause and pay attention in a way comfort never could. Perhaps it was a quiet grief that stayed with you for years. Perhaps it was a loss that reshaped the way you understand love. Perhaps it was a heartbreak that taught you the value of gentleness. These are not wounds we celebrate, but they are wounds that shape us into someone capable of perceiving the world with a depth that others might never experience. Simone Weil believed that suffering is not the enemy. The true danger is becoming numb, because numbness steals the ability to feel not only pain, but meaning. Suffering, when understood, reconnects us to the raw pulse of existence. It pulls us back into the center of ourselves, into the part that remembers what matters even when everything else is stripped away. If this reflection resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments and consider subscribing so that this space of quiet understanding can continue to grow around us in a way that honors your depth and your presence. There comes a time in life when the body begins to reveal truths the soul has been whispering for decades. You notice it first in the small hesitations. The knee that used to bend without question now pauses as if asking permission. The breath that once flowed like an open river now arrives in shorter waves. The skin that once felt like a boundary begins to feel like a memory. And yet, inside, there is a fire that refuses to dim, a vivid youngness that moves through your chest with the same intensity it carried when you were 20. It is a strange contradiction, almost cruel in its clarity. The body slows while the soul accelerates, and you live caught between these two currents that rarely move in harmony. Many people feel this contradiction most sharply in moments of solitude. They walk into a room and forget why they entered. They reach for a word that once came easily and instead find a silence that feels foreign. They hold a photograph from years ago and feel a rush of emotion so alive that it surprises them. It is as if the soul is reminding them that time has no real authority over the inner life. The body ages in a straight line, but the soul moves in circles, spirals, expansions that ignore the passing years. This inner youthfulness can be both beautiful and painful because it creates a longing for experiences that the body no longer supports with the same ease. Imagine someone in their 60s standing by a window, watching rain fall. Their back aches slightly, Their hands are marked with lines, but inside, the desire to run into the rain remains untouched. The memory of dancing, traveling, loving with abandon, laughing until the world blurred around the edges, all of it still lives inside with an intensity that feels almost unfair. This internal vitality can feel like a secret the world cannot see. The outside offers labels like older or retired or slowing down, but the inner life resists such simplifications. It insists on its own truth. It continues dreaming, longing, remembering, hoping. Science tries to explain this divide by talking about emotional memory, neural pathways, identity formation. But none of these explanations truly capture the experience. They do not describe the ache of wanting to climb a mountain with a body that now negotiates every stair. They do not capture the bittersweet tenderness of feeling desire inside a body that is learning to rest more often. They do not speak of the loneliness of having a soul that still feels new while the body feels increasingly unfamiliar. This loneliness is not about being alone. It is about living inside two timelines at once. There is also a quiet mourning that comes with this change. Not a dramatic mourning, but a soft, daily one. The mourning of agility, of energy, of certainty and movement. The mourning of a body that once felt limitless. Some people hide this mourning because they believe it is shameful to grieve the loss of youth, but it is not shameful at all. It is deeply human. The body is the home we inhabit, and when that home begins to shift, it is only natural to feel the tremors. What makes this mourning particularly painful is that the soul inside remains awake, curious, wide open. It is like living in a house with cracked windows while a vibrant festival continues inside. There is another layer to all of this, a layer that many people hesitate to name. It is the fear of becoming invisible as the body ages. People start speaking to you differently, treating you as if your desires have expired. They assume your passions have cooled, your dreams have shrunk, your curiosity has faded. They do not see the inner wildfire. They see only the outer frame. And yet inside, the soul still burns with the same longing for beauty, for meaning, for connection. It still feels the pull of life with fierce intensity. The tragedy is not aging. The tragedy is being mistaken for someone who no longer feels alive. Some people respond to this inner fire by reinventing themselves. They take up painting or writing or gardening. They discover joy in simplicity, in slowness, in presence. But even then, the contradiction remains. The body wants rest, while the soul wants expansion. The body grows cautious, while the soul grows fearless. The body learns limitation, while the soul learns desire. This duality can feel like a gentle tearing, a quiet separation between who you were and who you are becoming. But within this tension, something remarkable happens. The soul begins to speak more clearly. It begins to reveal truths you never had time to hear before. When the body no longer rushes, the soul finally has room to whisper. It tells you what truly mattered in your life and what never did. It shows you the moments you loved deeply and the ones you regret leaving unspoken. It reminds you of the people who shaped you, the choices that defined you, the dreams that still flicker in the dark. And in this quiet revelation, there is a sense of reconciliation. Not a resolution, but an understanding. You begin to see that aging is not a decline, but a doorway into deeper forms of clarity. If this reflection touched something inside you, I invite you to share your experience in the comments and subscribe so that you can continue walking through these contemplations with a community that understands the depth of your inner life. There is a quiet mistake that many people carry for decades without ever noticing. It is not a mistake of action, but a mistake of interpretation, a misunderstanding of their own emotional world. It begins early and slowly, like a gentle fog settling over the years. You grow up believing that your pain is inconvenient or unnecessary, or something you must hide to avoid burdening others. You learn to downplay your wounds, to smile through disappointments, to apologize even when you are the one hurting. And the strange thing is that this behavior becomes second nature. You stop asking yourself what you truly feel and start asking what others expect you to feel. Your pain becomes something you manage privately rather than something you allow yourself to understand. This tendency often begins in childhood. Maybe you grew up in a home where emotions were considered a luxury or a weakness. If you cried, someone told you it was nothing. If you felt fear, someone told you to toughen up. If you felt overwhelmed, you were told to keep going because life does not wait for anyone. And so you learned early that your pain did not deserve space. You became skilled at pushing it down, storing it in hidden corners of your mind, pretending you were stronger than you actually felt. But buried things do not disappear. They grow roots. They spread. They shape the way you navigate the world without you even noticing. By the time you reach adulthood, the habit is fully formed. You tell yourself that others have it worse, so you have no right to feel your own sadness. You tell yourself that your struggles are minor compared to the tragedies in the news, so you swallow your emotions before they can reach the surface. You tell yourself that you must be resilient, productive, reliable. And every time you ignore your pain, you reinforce the idea that it does not matter. You begin to treat yourself the way others once treated you, dismissing your own suffering with the same coldness you learned to expect. But the truth is that pain does not vanish simply because you decide it is unimportant. It becomes part of your personality. It hides beneath your reactions, shaping the way you respond to criticism, love, disappointment, and loss. You may not realize it, but the moments when you feel unreasonably sensitive or unexpectedly numb or strangely detached often trace back to this early decision to minimize your own suffering. You did not mean to create this pattern. You simply adapted to survive. But adaptation can become a trap when it forces you to live disconnected from your own emotional truth. There is something deeply human about this error. Many people over 50 describe a moment of awakening when they finally see this pattern for what it is. They look back at their younger selves with tenderness and sadness. They realize how many times they remained silent when they should have spoken. How many times they stayed strong when they desperately needed support. How many times they pretended to be fine because they believed their pain had no place in the world. And this realization often comes not in dramatic moments, but in everyday ones. Washing dishes, folding laundry, sitting alone in the car. Suddenly, the truth rises, steady and undeniable. A woman once shared that for years, she cried only in the shower, not because she was ashamed of her tears, but because she believed she had no right to cry anywhere else. She thought her role was to hold everything together. She thought her sadness was a distraction from what her family needed. Only later did she realize how much strength she had wasted trying to appear invulnerable. Only later did she understand that being human and being fragile are not contradictions. They are inseparable. Men often face this mistake in a different form. Many were raised to believe that vulnerability was dangerous. They learned to swallow frustration, to suppress fear, to remain silent even when falling apart inside. And for years they carried their pain like a private storm, believing it was noble to endure alone. But loneliness wrapped around unspoken pain becomes a kind of emotional prison. It isolates even in the presence of others. It creates distance between who you are and who you pretend to be. This mistake of minimizing your pain can also affect the way you love. You may accept relationships that require you to give more than you receive. You may stay quiet in moments when you feel unseen. You may allow others to cross boundaries because you are used to prioritizing their comfort over your own. And over time, you begin to believe that your needs are optional. You forget that your emotions deserve the same attention you so readily offer to everyone else. Simone Weil believed that true understanding comes from looking directly at what hurts, not turning away from it. She believed that suffering contains messages, signals, invitations to deeper awareness. When you ignore your pain, you ignore the lessons it carries. You silence the part of yourself that is trying to guide you toward truth. And this silence eventually becomes its own form of suffering. But something shifts the moment you recognize this mistake. It is as if the inner fog begins to lift, and the shape of your emotional landscape becomes visible again. You start to see that your pain has always had meaning, that your sadness was never trivial, that the heaviness you carried for years was not weakness, but a message waiting to be heard. And in that recognition, there is a quiet relief. Not a solution, not an erasing of wounds, but a soft return to yourself. If this reflection touched something inside you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe so that we can continue exploring these delicate truths together in a space that honors your story and your depth. There are seasons in life when the silence from above feels almost unbearable, a silence so complete that it seems to echo inside your chest. You speak inwardly, you plead, you reach for something beyond yourself, and nothing responds. The world keeps moving, days pass, responsibilities continue, but inside you there is a quiet question that no one hears. This silence can feel like abandonment, like a withdrawal of warmth, like the universe has turned its face away from you. And yet, Simone Weil believed that this silence was not absence, but a form of profound attention, a distance that invites the soul to grow in ways comfort never allows. For Weil, the silence of the divine was not a punishment, but a kind of trust. She believed that when life stops giving clear signs or easy answers, when the path becomes dim and the echoes return only to you, something hidden is being asked of you. Not action, not performance, not achievement, but depth. She wrote that the soul grows most in the spaces where it feels least held. It sounds paradoxical, even cruel, but anyone who has lived through long stretches of inner quiet knows that these periods often shape us more deeply than the moments filled with clarity. There are people who describe this silence as a kind of waiting room for the soul. They sit with questions that do not resolve. They walk through days that feel hollow. They look for meaning in conversations, in books, in memories, but nothing lands. It is as if the world has lowered its volume, and you are left with yourself, unfiltered, unguarded, exposed to every flicker of fear or longing you once managed to avoid. And in that exposure, a strange transformation begins. You start to notice things you never had time to feel before. The weight of your breath, the shape of your loneliness, the contours of your desires, the truth hiding behind your distractions. Will believed that the silence of the divine is similar to the silence of a teacher who steps back when the student is ready to discover something alone, not out of indifference, but out of respect, a refusal to interfere with the soul's encounter with itself. This idea can feel unsettling because we often imagine that love should announce itself loudly, that guidance should be obvious, that presence should be felt. But sometimes presence arrives disguised as distance, and that distance forces us to seek our own inner ground. Think of the moments in your life when someone you depended on stepped back, a parent watching you take your first steps, resisting the urge to hold your hand, a mentor allowing you to make a mistake so you could learn through experience, a friend giving you space because they trust your inner compass even when you do not. These moments are not abandonment, but invitations to grow in a dimension that cannot be taught through comfort. Simone Weil applied this same understanding to the quietness of the spiritual realm. The silence becomes a mirror, and you begin to see the truth of your own resilience. There is another layer to this silence, one that speaks not through words, but through the texture of everyday life. It appears in the moments when nothing seems to change despite your efforts. You pray, you think, you hope, you analyze, and still the situation remains still. It appears in the moments when you want guidance, but receive only the faint hum of your own thoughts. It appears when you long for reassurance, but hear only the sound of your own breathing. And this stillness can feel like cruelty, until you realize that within it, a new kind of awareness begins to awaken. People who have lived long enough often describe a moment when the silence stops feeling like emptiness and begins to feel like space. Space to think, space to feel, space to confront truths they once outran, space to acknowledge desires they kept hidden, space to understand grief that was never properly seen. In this space, the soul begins to stretch, not outward, but inward. It discovers depth not through answers, but through endurance. And this endurance creates a form of clarity that no external voice could ever give. Weil believed that the divine deliberately refuses to overwhelm us with certainty, because certainty can become a prison. When everything is clear, we stop searching. When everything is loud, we stop listening. Silence forces an intimacy with ourselves that noisy blessings never allow. It teaches us to discern the faint signals of truth that live beneath the surface of our lives. It teaches us to sit with discomfort instead of fleeing from it. It teaches us to find meaning even when meaning is not handed to us. Consider the people who speak of profound inner turning points, moments when their lives split into a before and after. These moments often occur in silence rather than revelation. Sitting alone in a car after hearing difficult news. Standing in the kitchen with hands resting on the counter as realization settles softly. waking up in the early morning with a feeling that something must change. These are not dramatic moments, yet they are transformative. They arise from the quiet, the very quiet that once felt unbearable. Simone Weil believed that the soul meets its truest self not through noise, but through stillness. And although this stillness can feel like abandonment, it is often a preparation, a clearing of inner space so that something essential can finally take root. The silence becomes a ground where you can begin again with more honesty, more humility, and more courage. It is a silence that asks not for faith in an external answer, but for faith in your own ability to walk through the unknown. If this reflection resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments and consider subscribing so that we can continue exploring these deeper layers of human experience together in a space where your inner life is heard and honored. There is a truth that most people spend their entire lives trying not to see, a truth that feels unfair and unbalanced and almost too heavy to admit out loud. The truth is that some souls truly do seem to carry more pain than others, not because they did anything to deserve it, not because they were unworthy of joy, but because something in their nature makes them magnets for the deeper currents of life. This is a truth that hides in plain sight. You can see it in the child who grows up too fast. You can see it in the adult who feels emotions more intensely than anyone guesses. You can see it in the elderly person who still carries a softness in their eyes despite everything they have lived through. It is as if certain souls are born open in a world that teaches most people to close. Some individuals seem to come into life with a vulnerability that others lose very early. They feel everything more strongly, as if their heart has no protective layer. They cry easily, not because they are weak, but because they are profoundly attuned. They sense betrayal before it happens. They notice when someone is hurting, even if that person never says a word. They carry compassion like a second skin. And while the world admires kindness, it rarely protects the kind. Sensitivity becomes both a gift and a wound. They end up absorbing the emotions of others, carrying burdens that were never their own, learning to heal others before learning how to heal themselves. And because they feel so deeply, they are the ones who hurt the most. There is a pattern that repeats itself in the lives of these souls. They often experience losses earlier than others. They face disappointments that shape them quickly. They encounter loneliness that lingers like an old shadow. They may endure heartbreaks that leave a lasting imprint, and each of these experiences deepens them, but it also weighs on them. They do not forget the past easily. Their memory is long and tender. Even decades later, they can recall the tone of a voice that hurt them or the warmth of a moment that saved them. These memories stay alive inside them, like small lights or lingering bruises. It is not that they cling to suffering. It is that suffering leaves marks that cannot be erased. There are families where one person becomes the emotional center, the one who carries the worry, the grief, the tension. These people often did not choose this role. It was assigned by circumstance. Maybe they were the peacemaker, the one who calmed the storms. Maybe they were the caretaker, the one who stayed awake while others slept. Maybe they were the listener, the one who absorbed secrets that never should have been placed on their shoulders. And because they were good at holding pain, more pain found its way to them. The world teaches us that responsibility is a virtue, but it rarely acknowledges the quiet cost of being the one who carries too much. Simone Weil believed that some souls are created with a deeper capacity for attention, and that this capacity exposes them to suffering in ways others cannot comprehend. She saw suffering not just as personal, but as something almost metaphysical. Certain souls come into this world already aligned with the suffering of others, as if they exist with a heightened sensitivity to injustice, loneliness, or loss. These people cannot look away. They cannot ignore what they feel. They cannot distance themselves from the wounds of the world, and this intensity isolates them, because most people do not understand what it means to feel life so profoundly that even silence can be overwhelming. For some, this heightened sensitivity expresses itself as empathy that borders on pain. They feel sadness in the eyes of strangers. They sense heartbreak in a conversation that seems casual. They are moved by things most people overlook, like an elderly person sitting alone on a bench or a child trying to be brave. And when the world is unkind, they carry the weight of that unkindness as if it happened to them personally. They have trouble detaching, trouble forgetting, trouble protecting themselves. But beneath this vulnerability lies a strength so quiet that even they do not recognize it. Only a strong soul can remain open in a world that constantly encourages people to close. There is a curious truth about these souls. Because they experience life so intensely, they also develop a rare kind of perception. They see patterns others miss. They understand the inner workings of people without needing explanations. They notice inconsistencies, emotional shifts, subtle truths. It is as if suffering sharpens their intuition, expanding their awareness rather than diminishing it. Many of them do not realize this because they spend so much time trying to manage their emotions. But if you ask them, they can often tell when someone is lying, hiding something, or breaking inside. They can sense when a relationship is ending before the final words are spoken. They can predict when someone needs help before that person even asks. Suffering, for them, becomes a strange form of clarity, and yet, this clarity comes at a price. These souls are often misunderstood. People may call them dramatic or overly emotional or too intense. Others may take advantage of their kindness because they sense that this person will forgive easily, give generously, and endure quietly. But deep inside, this misunderstanding leaves scars. It creates a feeling of being different, distant, set apart. It creates a sense of carrying something heavy that no one else ever sees. And this loneliness can be more painful than the suffering itself. But there is also a quiet beauty hidden in this truth. Souls that carry more pain often carry more wisdom. They understand life not from the surface, but from its depths. They know what it means to lose and still love. They know what it means to suffer and still remain gentle. They know what it means to be unseen and still offer kindness. These souls become the anchors of their families, the healers in their communities, the ones who give comfort simply by existing. Their suffering does not destroy them. It carves them into something rare, something luminous. If this reflection resonates with you, if you feel that life has given you more heaviness than you ever asked for, I invite you to share your story in the comments and subscribe so we can continue building a space where the depth of your soul is truly welcomed and understood. There is a moment in every life when something small shifts inside, a moment that does not announce itself with fireworks or grand revelations, but with a quiet inner movement that feels almost secret. It often happens after years of carrying pain, like a weight that has become part of your posture. You wake up one morning, or sit silently in your living room, or take a slow walk through a familiar neighborhood, and something inside whispers that the way you have been holding your suffering is no longer the only way. The pain is still there, but its meaning begins to change. What once felt like a chain starts to feel like a compass, pointing you toward a direction you have never considered. This shift does not come from sudden courage or external advice. It comes from exhaustion, from honesty, from the realization that the old pattern is simply too heavy to continue. You begin to see that your suffering can either be something that crushes you or something that teaches you where you need to go. The pain does not disappear, but it becomes a signal. It begins to tell you the truth you have avoided. It tells you which relationships drain you. It tells you which habits silence your soul. It tells you where you have been pretending, where you have been shrinking, where you have been carrying burdens that never belonged to you. And once you hear this truth, even faintly, you cannot return to the old version of yourself. Some people describe this shift as a kind of inner doorway. It is small, almost hidden, but once you notice it, something inside insists on stepping through. It may begin with a single decision, something so subtle that no one else notices. You say no when you usually say yes. You rest when you feel guilty for needing rest. You ask for help even though you have always carried everything alone. These small gestures begin to create new pathways inside you. They do not change your entire life overnight, but they begin to change your relationship to your own suffering. Imagine someone who has spent decades believing they must be strong for everyone else. They have carried responsibilities, secrets, disappointments. They have learned to perform resilience even when their heart trembled. One day, they sit at the edge of their bed, and instead of forcing themselves to push through the day, they allow their shoulders to drop. They breathe deeply. They let themselves feel tired. This single moment is not dramatic, but it is revolutionary. It is the first time they allow themselves to be human without apology. And in that softness, the direction of their life subtly changes. Simone Weil believed that transformation rarely comes from willpower. It comes from attention. When you begin to pay attention to the texture of your suffering rather than pushing it away, it starts to reveal what it wants from you. It may want you to slow down. It may want you to speak a truth you have swallowed for years. It may want you to leave a situation that harms you. It may want you to rediscover a part of yourself you abandoned long ago. Suffering becomes a guide, not an enemy. It becomes a teacher that speaks in whispers rather than commands. There is a kind of courage that grows from this process. It is not the courage of dramatic action or sudden confidence. It is the courage of honesty, the courage of admitting that your pain has meaning, the courage of realizing that you no longer want to live in the same emotional patterns. And once this quiet courage begins to take shape, you start making small internal choices that accumulate into profound change. You begin to trust your intuition instead of doubting it. You begin to set boundaries not out of anger but out of self-respect. You begin to treat your inner world not as a battlefield but as sacred ground. This shift also affects the people around you. When you decide that your suffering is no longer a burden to hide but a compass to follow, your relationships begin to rearrange themselves. Some people will not understand your new clarity. They may prefer the version of you who said yes to everything, who tolerated everything, who gave more than they received. But others will be drawn to your authenticity. They will respond to your honesty with honesty of their own. They will meet you at the depth where you now stand. And this shift creates a new circle around you, one built not on obligation, but on truth. There is also a sense of peace that arrives quietly as this process unfolds. It is not the peace of a life without problems. It is the peace of living in alignment with what is real inside you. For years, you might have carried the belief that suffering meant failure, that struggle meant weakness, that pain meant something was wrong with you. But in this new understanding, pain becomes a doorway into clarity. It becomes a way to discover what your soul has been trying to say. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. You may notice that you begin to move through your days differently. You speak more slowly. You think more deeply. You listen to yourself with more patience. You make decisions that honor your inner truth rather than your outer expectations. The world does not necessarily change, but your place within it does. You stop running from your life and begin walking toward it with a quiet steadiness. The suffering that once felt like a curse begins to feel like a map, leading you to a version of yourself that is more honest, more awake, more alive. And as this internal shift takes shape, you begin to understand that the direction you choose now does not need to be loud or spectacular. It only needs to be real. A real decision, a real adjustment, a real acknowledgement of who you are becoming. This is the kind of change that grows roots. This is the kind of change that creates meaning. This is the kind of change that reminds you that your suffering was never the end of your story. It was the beginning of your awakening. If these words resonated with you, I invite you to comment below and share your reflection. And if you feel called to, subscribe so that we can continue exploring these quiet transformations together with the depth and sincerity your soul deserves. There are moments at the end of a long inner journey when words begin to fade, not because there is nothing left to say, but because the soul finally arrives in a place where speaking is no longer necessary. This final place is not loud, not triumphant, not radiant with fireworks. It is quiet, it is still, it is honest. It feels like standing at the edge of a vast landscape that you have crossed step by step, carrying the weight of years, memories, wounds, and small miracles you barely recognized as they happened. And here, at this quiet edge, something inside you becomes soft enough to simply accept what is. There is a kind of peace that does not announce itself with a rush of relief. Instead, it unfolds slowly, like dawn revealing itself through layers of dim light. It is the peace that comes when you stop negotiating with life. Stop demanding explanations for every hurt. Stop expecting the world to return what was lost. It is the peace that emerges when you finally stop fighting the shape of your own story. You begin to understand that everything you lived, everything you carried, every moment that felt too heavy or too confusing or too lonely, shaped you into a soul capable of seeing the world with unusual depth. This acceptance is not resignation. It is recognition. A recognition that you have survived things you once believed would break you. A recognition that you have loved people with more tenderness than they ever knew. a recognition that your heart has stayed open despite everything that tried to close it. And in that recognition, there is a quiet dignity, a sense that you are enough and that your life, with all its imperfections, has meaning simply because you lived it with sincerity. In this silence, there is no need to ask for anything, not forgiveness, not answers, not blessings. The soul reaches a point where it simply sits with itself and says, I am here, I exist. I have walked through shadows and light, through noise and emptiness, through beginnings and endings, and I remain. And in that moment of simply being, something inside lifts, as if the weight of decades finally exhales. People often imagine prayer as a request, a reaching upward for help. But there is another kind of prayer, one that Simone Weil understood deeply. It is a prayer without asking, a prayer made of stillness, a prayer made of presence, a prayer that says nothing but means everything. It is the prayer of sitting quietly in your own truth, letting life be what it has been, letting yourself be who you are now, without resistance. This kind of inner stillness is not dramatic, but it is transformative. It rearranges your relationship to suffering. You no longer see your pain as a punishment or as evidence that you were chosen for hardship. Instead, you begin to see it as part of the fabric of existence, woven into your story not to diminish you, but to deepen you. All the loneliness, all the quiet nights, all the unanswered questions become threads in a larger tapestry, one that you may never fully understand but can finally honor. And in this soft honoring, something beautiful happens. Gratitude appears in places where you once felt only emptiness. A gratitude not for what you lost, but for the strength that loss carved into you. Not for the silence you endured, but for the clarity that grew in that silence. Not for the pain itself, but for the tenderness it awakened in you. The tenderness you now carry toward others who feel invisible, unheard, or forgotten. Gratitude also creates a gentle bridge between who you were and who you have become. You begin to thank the younger versions of yourself, the ones who kept moving even when they were tired. You thank the moments that broke you because they opened you. You thank the love that once felt insufficient because it still taught you something. You thank the life you lived, not because it was easy, but because it was real. And perhaps most importantly, gratitude invites a new beginning, even here at the end of this reflection. Not a beginning made of grand resolutions or sudden changes, but a beginning made of presence, a beginning made of breath, a beginning made of the simple awareness that you are allowed to exist gently now, without carrying the world on your shoulders. Before we close, I want to thank you, truly. Thank you for listening with your whole heart. Thank you for allowing these words to enter the quiet places inside you. Thank you for walking through each chapter of this journey with such depth and sincerity. Your presence here matters more than you know. And if you feel called to continue this inner exploration, I invite you to watch the next video that will appear on your screen. It is waiting for you with the same softness, the same honesty, the same depth. Let it accompany you forward, not as instruction, but as presence. If these reflections touched you, consider leaving a comment so your voice can join this space. And subscribe if you wish to keep walking alongside this community of souls who feel life deeply. May you leave here with a quieter heart, and may the silence ahead feel like a companion rather than an absence.